Alright everybody, welcome to video number 2 of Path to Glory, where we're going to look at all of the stuff that Jagex has released so far as all of the teasers for the Fortis Colosseum and everything like that. We're going to look at all that stuff and we're going to come up with some theories, maybe some strategies as well. Let's jump right into a little bit of what they've talked about here. So first video we're going to look at is their Winter Summit 2024. This is the most recent video. They talk a little bit about the Fortis Colosseum.
Colosseum, man. Tell us
Colosseum.
about the Colosseum.
The Colosseum is the biggest building in old school RuneScape.
I think you could probably fit the pyramid from TOA inside the middle of the Colosseum. So
That's crazy. That's a lot of space to work with. And it looks like they're releasing an enemy here that we'll see in a second that you're going to need some space to deal with, so that's important. But this is huge. That's way bigger than anything we've seen before. Hopefully they work on the run energy before this comes out, because obviously you're going to need some sort of stamina if that's the case and you're having to maneuver around. You have to deal with line of sight, all that.
it's gargantuan.
There's a lot of small little dudes. Is the best.
We're going to be coming back to this a lot. They talk about these small little dudes. A couple little takeaways I have from this picture specifically is these are probably people we can all expect to be in the Colosseum at this point. But so we have these little guys here. I think the biggest implication, the biggest takeaway of this is that they're from all over Gielinor. It's not one specific region. So it kind of leaves the playing field open for what we're going to expect there.
Best way I can describe it. You've also got shield walls. You're going to have to maneuver around actual mobile terrain.
This is interesting. She talks about mobile terrain, something we haven't seen before. I assume this is something that will have to be attacked from a specific side. Something that would be immune to melee, maybe. Something that has to be hit with magic. If anything, it's going to be kind of a pain in the butt, I assume. Something that definitely be able to get up close to you. Something that will deal with line of sight specifically.
Actual mobile terrain to block lines of sight, to block enemy pathing. But you have to be careful, because if you block line of sight to some of them, you're in trouble.
Okay, this is what we talked about before. I assume there's going to be some sort of summoning mechanic. We've seen something that resembles a necromancer. Almost always when people have snake magic in quotations, that's something that's going to have to deal with summoning as well. So elements of summoning are something that I do expect to show up. If you lose line of sight in, say, in reference to Inferno, we have bats. These snakes could be something that drains your prayer, and that's something that's summoned on a regular basis. That would be hard to deal with. I don't expect that snake mage is going to be something that's persistent, but maybe that mechanic is persistent throughout the Colosseum fight in general.
We would try to focus on a core set of creatures as well. We've got a manticore, sort of like this.
A manticore is an interesting one. I do believe they spelled it incorrectly. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe that's an I in the lore. I could be wrong. Call me crazy. But it's interesting because this is depicted as being able to shoot its barbs in some historical references. So obviously shoots energy. This is going to be something that very simply could have multiple combat styles. They do talk about all combat styles being something that's important. I expect these to be standalone waves. And then we have something of a flood wave when it comes to the actual, lots of little people that she references. So the human waves I expect to have a lot more elements. Maybe this is something that they do together, that there's more than just one specific element to each wave. But I do expect this to be, the pinnacle of a wave. So we have something like the Manticore. This is going to have multiple combat styles. It's going to be able to shoot magic, as we see depicted in this little green shot here. Absolutely there's going to be poison associated with this. You can see the poison coming off of it. I mean, come on. And then the melee, it's supposed to have 3 sets of jaws, so it's going to be something that's going to be able to combat off, So we're going to have melee, we're going to have magic. Who knows, maybe there's rangers shooting at you, and it's, that's where the whole line of sight comes into play. Yet to be known, but let's move on, see what else they've got.
Human, jaguar, scorpion, hybrid. We've got the minotaur, which is very
Smashes humans. I think this is the biggest thing to take away. Everybody knows what a Minotaur is. This is a little bit more straightforward. We see Where is Labyrinth. The one thing that I think when we see this is all supposed to be in my eyes, a teaser, something that's going to hint to us. This isn't something that they made for internal use. This is something to be released to the public. Smashes humans. I assume there's some sort of shockwave associated with this, so even if you have Protect for Melee on, that's not something that's going to be an immunity to this. It's going to be more of a special attack type boss. Whereas Labyrinth, that makes me believe that there's going to be some goofy pathing. It's not something that you can line of sight and just get out of the way of. So expect something that's going to be a very, very fast-paced, in-your-face, ground-pounding boss when it comes to the Minotaur. I think that's a pretty obvious one.
Classic. I guess it's more Greek, but you know, Roman and Greek, they kind of just borrow from each other. We've got the Colossi, quite like the idea.
Let's go back and let's actually look at
Colossi
that. I want to see that
sort of
again.
Referenced, which is very classic. I guess it's more.
It does look like Protect for Melee on. Oh, it looks beautiful. They do say work in progress. Don't expect this to be what it looks like. This is a little janky. I want some beautiful art as far as the Colosseum goes. Well, it looks like Torva prices will be on the rise. Everybody, prep the bank account.
They kind of just borrow from each other. We've got the Colossi, quite like the idea of the Colossi of.
This is an interesting one. So it looks like maybe there's ranged elements to this boss. It's going to be dropping a spear where you stand. An interesting mechanic, probably hits a 3x3. So you're going to have to move the position that you're currently in. This reminds me almost of Kefri bombs. This fight looks similar to Kefri. I wonder if this doesn't look like something that would challenge you to the same level of Inferno. I do see a lot of elements of TOA associated to this. So I expect more than just one single boss at a time when we see this Colossus of Rhodes. This is Max recording from the future, watching back the video. I think one important thing that I didn't hint on was we see that this player has a crush weapon when fighting this boss, which we saw a slash or stab weapon against the previous boss. So that's an interesting mechanic that leads me to believe that all three of the combat styles, crush, stab, and slash, are going to be very important here. I love to see that. Dropping of the
Cool
spear coming from the sky.
It's gonna be awesome. He's watching you fight. He's really disinterested until you like get to him, and he's like, "Okay, cool. I gotta deal with you now." That's gonna be exciting to see.
The main boss have a catchphrase.
Catchphrase.
It's stomping time.
Yeah, it's stomping time.
Who do we think the main boss is going to be? When we hear them say that, that makes me think associated it could be the Colossus of Rhodes, but there's no way they're going to tease that yet, especially with what they bring us here.
Here's the spoiler: the enemy in the Colosseum was actually the dog the whole time.
If that were the twist, I wouldn't tell you. No comment.
Confirmed.
Alright, let's be honest, it probably is the dog, but they give us that throne. Somebody sits on top of that throne. Somebody gets off of that throne, and it's not a manticore. It's not a minotaur. I believe the boss of the Colosseum is going to be humanoid. We'll see. You know, maybe it's Maximus Aurelius. Hopefully. That is it for that video, though. So let's move on to the next video, which is going to be a little Q&A they released regarding the Colosseum. So let's just jump right into it.
What style of combat do you expect to be the best choice?
So, we're not really expecting a clear best. We're aiming for it to be like more of a tribrid activity, so there's going to be a mix of all three in there somewhere. Purely because of how combat works in our game, you'll probably find that ranged and mage end up being the most useful. We're looking at maybe having some specific NPCs that are weak to melee, but maybe that's more of a risky choice for you to run in and try and have a jab at them.
Interesting thing they just said there. So, similar to something like the Inferno, where, you know, melee is an option, something that you can use to basically get a little bit of bonus damage. You know, people will use finishing with the scythe. A faster method for a little bit of bonus risk. So something that, say they have an off style of melee, so you want to keep them at range. That's something that we see a lot of throughout the game, a mechanic that it looks like they're going to have presented inside of the Colosseum, something that you could expect for the hardest content in the game.
Yeah, the answer really is all three, in some way or another.
Alright, thank you, Mac. Alright, and how long do you reckon average run to take? Obviously, I don't know how much I'm going to spoiler territory, because we're trying to be quite tight-lipped with a lot of the stuff, but any any expectation?
So we're definitely not looking at like 2 hours like an Inferno run. We want people to be able to get in, have a stab at it, fail, and then get back in again. So we're sort of aiming for between 15 and 20 minutes initially, potentially with that moving up towards the 10-minute mark, depending on how good people go. So yeah, this is definitely a month.
Okay, 20 minutes towards the 10-minute mark. I think that's an interesting implication. That means that none of the waves are going to take a very long time. I guess if you only have 12 waves and you're expecting more than a minute on each wave, and this is a rough estimation. When they say that the Inferno takes up to 2 hours, you see people that cheese the Inferno that takes them 6 hours. And so if you're cheesing the Colosseum, what are the implications to that? That the Colosseum could take you 1 hour. Is it not cheesable? That's something that, is yet to be known. That could be something they try to bake into it. It's a little bit more straightforward as far as you have to actually do the mechanics. I do think we're going to see a little bit of that. But if they're expecting a run to be able to be finished in 10 minutes, there is a way to get through each of the waves quickly. That's interesting to hear. It's not a tank test. It's not a time test. So I like to see that. A lot less tax on the inventory, a lot less about brews. They do talk a little bit about the strength of brews and being able to get through the first couple phases with brews.
Much shorter piece of content.
Yeah, I think that was half of the aim of the content, right? Is not be as long as the other ones, because that is, this is the beauty of this piece of content, is to go in and just try again and try again and try again, and you don't want to get to hour 1 and then be like, oh no, I've got to try again now. Oh, this just feels bad. No, we have that content in there, but that's in a good place. So.
You want that kind of Dark Souls feel of just like coming back to the bonfire and throwing yourself back at it rather than like slogging through an hour's worth of monsters.
Well said, well said. Awesome. Alright. How difficult then, talking of Dark Souls, like, how difficult do you expect this to be compared to other wave-based content?
Initially, I think it's going to be more difficult than the Inferno, purely because we're bringing in some very new mechanics that haven't been seen before. Yeah, we'll see, but I think initially more difficult than the Inferno.
Interesting qualification there. More difficult than the Inferno, which that's one of the pieces of content that almost nobody can finish. When he says new mechanics, that makes me think that maybe this is a puzzle that once solved will be easier than the Inferno. That's almost what the implication is there, that right now it's going to be harder than the Inferno, but once everything gets solved, once the mechanics get pieced out, that won't necessarily be the case. It'll be interesting to see how long that necessarily takes. With the way that some things roll, you expect, a lot of people are going to be trying to tackle this, so how long does a mechanic stay, behind wraps? What are these new mechanics they're talking about? In any of the videos that they've released so far, we don't see any hints of these new mechanics, so I'm very curious to see. Probably the newest mechanic that we have any reference to is a moving shield wall. We don't know exactly what that will be, but everything else they released is pretty straightforward. The Colossus of Rhodes, that's nothing new. It looks like a Kefri. The Minotaur, we didn't see any special moves there associated to anything like that, so we don't know.
Potentially coming sort of in line, depending on how much players experience it. But we do have some crack players out there, and I don't know, maybe some of them will breeze through it.
He said it for me.
Is that throughout the whole thing, Matt? Or is it like the higher end is going to be at the...
Good prompt, yeah. I mean, at the lower end, I'm kind of expecting more. If you've got a fire cape, you can probably take a couple of waves, but yeah, I want it to ramp up.
So if you have a fire cape, you can probably take a couple of waves. So that means that if you can finish the fight caves, if you can get through Jad, you can probably finish the first 2 or 3 waves of this. That's an interesting implication. That means that it ramps up quickly, and it gets significantly harder. I wonder if there's going to be any rewards or anything associated to finishing, say, Wave 8. They do talk a little bit about some of the rewards later on, as far as things, you know, like Wave 2 unlocks an herb patch, something like that. So I do expect tiers, and I do expect it to be progressively better and better as the tiers go up, which makes me think that Varlamore is sort of a tier-based system as far as skill in the Fortis Colosseum, which is interesting. It's an interesting implication.
Quite quickly, so the middle to the end is really quite a push.
I think it's fair to say that like it's a much shorter activity. So even if you suck at the game, you could probably brew through like first 3 waves, right? Brews are so good. So yeah, it will be like accessible for someone in the early game of their account to like just go for some lucky drops and stuff like that.
That's a big hit right there. So he talks about going for lucky drops off of the first couple waves. That makes me think that as you go through the waves, it's just going to increase the percentage chance of being able to get, say, the Glaive of Ralos, something that isn't the quiver. Because the quiver is, you get the quiver by finishing the waves. The quiver is, you know, your cape slot unlock, just like the Inferno cape. So that's something you get by actually completing the whole entire instance. But it sounds to me like there's going to be a percentage-based chance based on the wave you've completed to get the other drops from the Inferno. Or not the Inferno, the Colosseum. Yeah, Inferno Blue. So that's an interesting implication. And also, it looks like we voted on the melee version of the Proselyte armor, the best in slot Proselyte armor, so that's probably another drop from here. I do believe that armor is going to be better than people think. That's a very, very, very sound thing, having high stats like that on top of the highest prayer bonus in the game for a, you know, tank item.
Yeah, well said. I want to see all the I cheesed wave 1 by brewing only. That's it. Awesome. Alright, this might be a quick one, but will there be a quiver max game?
Interesting. So we're going to jump ahead right now. They're going to talk about the invocations. The rest of this is just them talking about cosmetics. We don't care about cosmetics.
Will be as restrictive as Invocations at 2 with a masker?
To be honest, we don't have many of them planned yet. It's kind of a bit of an open book, but yes, they're going to restrict kind of the player. They're going to buff enemies. They're going to maybe change some of the arena's elements as well.
It's interesting that he says that specifically. He says it's going to change the arena's elements as well. That makes me think that there's going to be pitfall traps, something like that. You know, this is something that we've seen in, you know, medieval Colosseums. You know, if you watch gladiators, say, there's traps that open up in the ground and lions come out. Maybe that's where the manticore or other mythical creatures are introduced into these fights. So expect traps in the arena. That's one thing that I think. Maybe the traps are associated to the invocations. Not invocations, but after round upgrades. I do think they don't necessarily want these to be buffs. So when we think of the knowledge that we're going into this with the knowledge of, you know, how Hades works, or say League of Legends Arena, this is something that was introduced, a mechanic there as well. An after round upgrade, this is going to be almost the opposite of a debuff to increase loot potential. Because it sounds like it's going to be a complex loot equation as to what truly comes out of that chest. And each time you add a difficulty, each time you complete a wave, you're adding on to the potential reward total at the end of your run.
I think,
Is it?
So a lot of the ones we've planned so far are like the enemies get like ridiculous abilities. It's not like when you eat food, you regain half.
Enemies get ridiculous abilities. I wonder how widespread these are going to be, because I expect this might look like an invocation, let's say, more help for Kefri. So the Colossus of Rhodes now throws his spears at double the attack speed. We might see something like this. Minotaur's ground slam occurs in a wider radius. So when we see this, it makes me wonder, is it going to be randomized as far as that goes? And how many of these? Is it 1 per round? If it's 1 per round, we're going through 12 total upgrades. Maybe a lot of these will center around the boss at the end, as opposed to being specific to waves like that. So maybe we don't see anything for the Colossus of Rhodes, but maybe it's all enemies have 20% increased health, or the final boss, Steve, we're calling him Steve the Gladiator, is going to be able to cleave attack. Steve the Gladiator is going to attack at twice the attack speed. Steve the Gladiator will be able to dash through you. I'm not exactly sure as what that's going to look like, but I do expect there to be more associated to the final boss as opposed to randomization for the earlier rounds. I expect those to be pretty static. As far as global buffs or debuffs, I expect that to be more universal for all the waves.
Of health. We might do that if it, like, because I think, oh, I don't know if I'm a D8 here, but I think we've discussed how you get choices at the end of each wave, and so you can avoid picking the ones that will debuff you. But I think we probably, TO.
So you can avoid the ones that'll debuff you, but if there's no buffs, then that just means that if you're not debuffing you, you're buffing the enemies. So you have a choice. You don't necessarily have to weaken yourself, which I like. I don't like the idea of feeling weak to complete the wave. I like the idea of the opponents being stronger. I do think they hit on that. They talk about the sense of accomplishment from killing a stronger enemy, not feeling weaker to complete the whatever the challenge may be. But that is a way to avoid strengthening the enemies is weakening yourself, so it's a trade-off. I like that exists. It's good that they're looking at the universal nature of these as opposed to making them, sort of one-track mind. I like that. It's going to be very, very interesting to see when this finally comes out.
OA got a bit of flack for the whole, like, oh, you can't eat, or, like, you restore less prayer and stuff like that. We don't...
When it's a wave-based mechanic like this, and there could be something that exists, say, Wave 3... it strikes me as being nearly impossible that they would have something that would say you can no longer drink brews for the rest of this Colosseum battle. So I don't think that we're going to have restrictions like that. Maybe there's a restriction upon entering something that, sort of like Invocations. It gives you a random thing that you can actually then dictate your inventory. I don't expect that to be the case. So don't expect any restrictions as far as the gear that you get to bring in. I really think that that's an important thing to hit on. I think you're going to be able to bring in any type of gear that you want. Any type of combat style, I think, will be available throughout each round. I don't think that the limitations will exist in that regard because of the fact that in this wave-based mechanic, they don't want you to feel like your inventory becomes useless. That would not feel good. That would be a mechanic that I don't expect would exist.
We don't want to make the player feel weaker generally. We want to make the enemies feel absolutely cracked, so that when you beat them, you feel like a god.
Expect bonus stats, expect additional moves, expect increased attack speed, and expect increased movement speed. These are all things that I think we can expect. And they talk about changing the arena. Expect falling fireballs, expect Molotovs from the crowd, whatever it might be. I think we need to expect elements like that as well. We see the size of the arena. If you could fit the TOA pyramid in there, it is massive. There's going to be lots and lots of maneuvering associated with this battle. Lots and lots.
People are laughing about that NDA.
Yeah, hopefully I haven't just lost my job.
I think it's okay. I think you're alright, still alright. Alright, we've got 2 more questions and then we'll move on to Perilous Moons. We've got something quite cool to show you. What combat level do you recommend for the Colosseum?
Good question. Lower levels, maybe 90s, and then anything over that, then yeah, you're probably going to be very late game.
All right. No beating around the bush. You got to get your levels up. It says, 90s, so I think they're talking combat level. So maybe if you have 80 attack, 80 strength, something like that, range magic to boot, you can expect to be able to get through the first couple levels, which that's interesting to hear. So it will scale, but it sounds like very quickly the fall-off happens that you want to be max combat level before you attempt something like this, but maybe it makes sense if it's going to be really endgame content. But if it's that endgame content, how are Iron Men ever going to be able to farm the Glaive of Ralos here and, say, exchange that for the hammer? That's something that I think is going to be a huge selling point to the Colosseum. So we'll see how that all turns out, how that bakes out in the end.
110, 120 plus.
Yeah, we go.
You know what to aim for. There we go. Alright, and finally, will there be combat achievements for the Colosseum?
Yes.
I think that's all they have to say. Yes, they'll obviously be delayed, but very exciting. I'm very excited to see what these combat achievements look like. I expect them to be associated around all of the specific bosses that exist in the Colosseum. Expect there to be more than just the Colossus of Rhodes, the Minotaur, the Manticore. There's going to be plenty more to boot. I expect there to maybe be 6 and 6, 6 waves of enemies, 6 mythical creatures, whatever that is. Maybe 5 mythical creatures in 1 boss battle, the big bad of the arena. We'll see. I'm very excited to see how that boils down, but I think that's going to sum it up for the video today. Thank you for watching. Remember, we're just getting started as far as the channel goes, so it would be awesome if you guys could like this video. If you could subscribe to the channel, it would mean a ton as we're getting started. I'm going to keep releasing multiple videos every week. I do love old school RuneScape. I'm absolutely certain I'm going to love making videos for you guys, so thanks for watching, and tune in next time.